we are ready to go live now. So I can start with the roll call. We'll start with Councillor Galloway, Councillor Harris.
I am here.
Councillor Jowett.
I'm here.
Councillor Kiefer.
I am here too.
Councillor Nowak.
I'm here.
Chair Strickland. I can see. Here we are.
Here, sorry. Yep.
And Regional Chair Redmond.
Here.
So that's all present except for Councillor Galloway.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tim, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our ad hoc community benefits procurement committee meeting. And we have a couple items of business to deal with today. The first being the approval of minutes from the previous meeting. Can I have a mover and seconder for those, please? Councillor Kiefer, seconded by Councillor Jowett. Any discussion? All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much. And then last meeting, we had several presentations and really good overview of community benefits from different jurisdictions, Toronto and Vancouver, principally, and also a consultant giving us a pretty good overview of community benefit agreements and what they're set to accomplish and hope to accomplish, and some of the positives and some of the things to be aware of also as we embark upon this journey. But we weren't able to hear from our own staff about the work that the Waterloo region has done on community benefits, and Richard has joined us here today. And unless there's any questions from committee, I would suggest we just get right into the presentation from Richard on the work that we're doing at Regional Waterloo. So Craig, Richard, welcome.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Hope you can hear me okay. Great. Yep, so we have a presentation that we've put together for the committee today. A little bit of, and perhaps I'll ask Mr. Shafer to share his screen so that you can see the material that we've assembled. We wanted to do just a very quick recap of the process to date. As you said, Mr. Chair, getting right into the piece we weren't able to get to last time, which was an update on some of the work that had already been started here at the region of Waterloo. And then we want to talk about, there's, I guess, two other pieces. One is a bit of a potential policy discussion in terms of how we might proceed with respect to community benefits here at the region, and also some input from the committee around public consultation. So those are the main areas that we wanted to cover off over the course of the day today. And I'll be sharing the presentation with Mr. Shafer from our facilities area. So if you go to the next slide, Rich, that would be great. Which I've just, I think, adequately covered. So let's move on to the next.
Sorry, Mr. Dyer, can I interrupt? My apologies. Which screen are you seeing? Do you see the working slides or the?
I see a slideshow, a full screen slideshow. I think what I'm seeing is what we want to see.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, and my apologies. Thank you.
That's okay. Thanks for checking. And if we go to the next slide, just in terms of a quick recap. So you'll recall we had the resolution passed by council back in April, a kickoff meeting in June, and as described by the committee chair, the meeting we had back in August with the presentations from various municipalities and from the consultant we then had engaged. So today, again, summary of work that we've done, some policy option discussion, and some planning for public consultation. Next slide, please. So just here for your, I won't go through this in detail. It's just here for your reference, the motion that was captured at the council meeting back in April. If we go to the next slide, we'll go to the key clause, which is that the region form the committee with councillors supported by staff to determine specifics related to community benefits agreements, workforce development agreements, and to report back. So if we go to the next slide, we had, you'll recall we had put a terms of reference together And some of the key items from there, reviewing and evaluating various initiatives and practices across the country, undertaking some consultation, considering various policy options, and making recommendations to council. Next slide, please. So as set out in the resolution, the committee, with the support of staff, looking to determine the specifics with respect to community benefits agreements, and specifically looking for ways where how we can use our buying power to recruit, engage, and retain a diverse workforce with underrepresented groups. So as we get into the public consultation piece today, we'll talk more about this. And in the, you'll see in the pilot that we're going to propose, where we have some language drafted that would show how we would incorporate potentially community benefits agreements into a couple of upcoming tenders. Next slide, please. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Rich Shafer. Rich, as I said earlier, is from our facilities management team here at the region and has been involved in some discussions and a working group that was assembled back in 2019. And he's going to give you an update on the work that that group did and talk a little bit about some of the policy options available to council. Over.
Thanks, Mr. Dyer. Hello, everyone. My name is Richard Shafer. So the manager planning performance management in facilities. You might wonder why I'm here talking to you today about this topic. A few years ago, I shared passion with our friends in ENIS and housing. We got talking about informing the capital plans, capital projects that we'd be working on through the master plan process. So there was a number of conversations in that regard. And so I was one of a group of people who were fortunate to be involved. So we had a working group essentially informed the development of the social procurement plan for that master plan. And our intention there was to make some recommendations going forward. So I don't recall exactly the language in the master plan, but essentially it was the development of a social procurement plan. And I appreciate that over time that our terminologies have evolved. And I believe that's the intention there was community benefits. So there were us involved, come and go, you know how things go. But typically there were at least 9 of us. All those groups were represented, as I mentioned. We had 7 formal meetings, countless other coffee chats, and just a lot of interest in the topic. So in fall 2019, certainly as we headed towards council endorsement of the Waterloo Region Housing Master Plan, there was, what was the language we were going to try to get included here? And so we learned from experts, similar to how this ad hoc committee has proceeded, bringing in experts from outside, discussing different options. What have other municipalities been doing? What are some of the best practices? And then what was sort of next steps for us internally? So in spring 2020, there was a number of key things had to be put on hold, including one of this group because of the pandemic. And there was some discussion about the scope. Do we do anything beyond the housing capital projects? And it was decided just to keep it limited to those housing projects. And of course, as Mr. Dyer just explained, in spring of this year, we were given direction to proceed with this committee, which is a great next step. Key learnings, I don't know that there's anything really earth-shattering here, but it's still important to formalize because there was so much work and effort. And so between this slide and the next couple slides, you'll see how the lessons learned and our attempts at framing it in for next steps are all tied together. So, I'll touch on these just quickly. Certainly, there are no one key item that says, oh, this is the social procurement approach or the community benefit approach. There's many different ones. Second, of course, this whole discussion is certainly not misaligned with our values and our intention as a community, leaders in our community. Certainly there a lot of things here that make sense theoretically. What we did find, of course, is just a challenge of just knowing how to start it, how to connect it all together, how to phase it, involving our stakeholders in a community, and certainly the interested parties, the associations, consortium associations, and as examples. And, in terms of staging and phasing, there's support needed, and who needs to be on the team, and at the end of the day, will the general contractors and consultants buy in? Are they partners, or are they or are they not? And certainly we're hoping to move forward in the successful win-win for everyone involved. Measurement of outcomes is difficult but doable. Isn't this the case? We have had so many discussions with our colleagues in E&IS around what measures are important to us as an organization, as a municipal leader in this community. What is it that we're going to take dollars towards, and what do we want to see as an outcome? Now, I'm using that word carefully. It's not just outputs, but outcomes. What are the benefits for our community members? And can they be tracked, reported on successfully? And just a couple last pieces here. Certainly, I think we're well aware that there are others around the world who are all in different phases of their own journey in terms of similar programs. And we fit somewhere on that continuum as well. And that's sort of the end here, is that we're not expecting that we're going to jump into large capital project or program implementation anytime soon, but look to you for your direction and conversation around that topic. So a couple of things that have happened already. There have been a number of efforts put in place for laying the groundwork for CBAs, community benefit agreements. There's a bunch of examples that could be shared. I'm specifically, the ones that I'm most aware of are the Housing Master Plan, 416 Kings Court, 82 Wilson, are the two upcoming builds that we're looking to pilot some of these CB components. Youth Force, that goes back to 5 years ago now. Just a social enterprise employment program, which has been very successful, I think, in my observation, what I've heard from my colleagues in housing. Just the youth being trained, hired to work, and having those professional development opportunities in process. So before I get into a little bit about the two builds, just some quick background. 82 Wilson, 32 net new units, and I use that term because we're removing the existing 16 units. We're putting up a building for 48 as an example. Estimated construction value around $7 million. That will be material for some of our discussion going forward here today. I just wanted to share that with you. And in terms of timelines, they're a little bit fuzzy right now, but we're thinking for 2022. So tender could be like Q3. If not sooner. 416 Kings Court, there are 74 net new units. In this case, we're not removing existing buildings, so those are 70. This is a building construction for 74 units. We're thinking it's sort of a similar time frame in terms of construction. They're overlapping, and this building is definitely, from a construction perspective, 40% higher, so $28 million. Okay, so what we've done so far, as part of our consultant and relationship with the architect, we've asked them to use that opportunity to, through the development of the physical design, include requirements and account for partnerships with our community members. And we reached out, and through process with that housing-led, there was a partnership with Alzheimer's Society, particularly for 82 Wilson, to identify what their needs are and say, hey, there's offices, there's communal space, and there's space to deliver programs. What would that look like? So that's baked into the design. And it's not just, 3,000 square feet set aside with a little kitchenette or something like that. There's actually a really well thought out design that's built for them. So that's really exciting, including a commercial kitchen. The thinking around this is that it's not just for this partner, but that others may want to serve food to the community through whatever means. And instead of it being, that typical kitchenette with the microwave, we have a bit of a public health certified, I don't know if that's the proper term, forgive me if I'm mistaken here, but essentially it's this idea that it's available to be used for multiple purposes. So really exciting stuff going on at 82 Wilson. And similarly at 416 Kings Court, we have community benefit, again, through the physical design. And we're partnering with the region's own senior services, including programming. And I believe there are office spaces included as well. So a little bit of background on that. So that's the design. And so we're giving direction to the architect. We want you to partner and figure out, what the requirements are to facilitate these partnerships. The next part of the CB, the community, this is the thing that we're proposing today, is more around the workforce development plan. So Richard Brooks, our legal beagle, our guru in legal, has helped us. And so there's language that we want to put in the supplementary general conditions. So I've just taken out, tried to distill down for our discussion today, just some key highlights. So we've chosen, in consultation with ENIS over the past couple of years, what would be appropriate? What would be what would be really helpful here in terms of working and providing some opportunities for at the time we were discussing Ontario Works clients. And so they were thinking 6 weeks minimum in terms of shadowing, being coached, getting some familiarity with a job site. So that could be 240 hours, either full-time 6 weeks or spread out over the year. The plan that we're providing direction to the generals to propose back to us is to include recruitment strategies, training, mentoring. They have to include hours and effort for administration of the plan, as well as reporting back to us. And the last is that we're referring to designated persons noted as Indigenous, female, African Canadian, or person of color, or in receipt of assistance pursuant to the Ontario Works Act. And I think that's our proposal, and look forward to discussion and direction from you on that. Okay, so I mentioned earlier how over the past couple of years we've had these lessons learned that I could put down in bullet points, but we could also do this. It's like, well, what would it look like here at the region? And we have these themes, and this is roughed out, and look forward to discussion on this as well, of course. But we see opportunities based on other municipalities, others that best practices, things that we've learned, that we feel that there's these 5 themes, areas, and perhaps we're missing some. Let's add, let's correct, whatever. But for discussion, we have this thing about leveraging our dollars for capital, leveraging our dollars in the second column for service contracts, perhaps using policy to influence partners. We flow money through as to our development partners. Is there anything there that we could put into policy? Certainly the 4th column, hiring practices. This is something that we've learned from Toronto and others as well. It's just this is the living wage conversation, I believe, that's happening. Certainly recruitments around staff diversity and so forth. And the 5th column, it's measuring things that we can't improve, things that we don't measure. That's sort of an old adage in the energy management field. It's similar here. It's a program that we want to demonstrate value, and it's bigger than just dollars, of course. But what are those measures? What are those KPIs that we'd like to see in place, and then track them, report on them, and so forth. So I'm just went to the next slide here. Essentially, the 5 buckets are now on the left-hand side. And so what we're trying to do is show an action plan. It's a bit of a proposed approach here. And so leveraging procurement capital projects, we've been given direction to explore and develop a plan for the builds as part of that program. And we're looking to bring lessons learned back in late 2023 back to council. It's that's one area that we're active in. We're providing support to each other, and looking forward getting some of that things going for sure, which is really, really cool stuff. Service contracts, just do we draft any wording? What are your thoughts on that? What are the limits? 100,000, 50,000, 10,000? What do you want to see there? And certainly, could we pilot, in the third item there, pilot some policy direction with the local housing providers? Again, just discussion, throwing it up there. I believe I saw Ryan on the call, so perhaps he can weigh in on some of these thoughts as well. Hiring practices, implement the living wage requirements within certain service contracts. So I believe that's an active conversation. And certainly at the end here, the draft, a set of KPIs. What's important to us? What's important to you? What's important to our organization? What do we want to measure? And what is reasonable to measure, and so forth. So that's sort of where we're at in terms of proposed approach. And of course, this doesn't come without effort. And so we've identified, we could use support here with project lead, perhaps some analysis support, and somebody who does legwork and investigation, pulls it together, social planner, and then of course procurement staff. It's, there's a lot of effort across the board, and I might be missing some people here. The point here is that there should be a conversation around this and get the right stakeholder table to help determine what the next steps in terms of resourcing would be helpful. And then training and education of our staff of whatever direction council provides to us. And then certainly education, research, and changes to policy and procedures. There's a number of people throughout the organization that all have a role to play, and would love to make sure that they're at the table with this as a priority in hand. So with that, I think, Mr. Dyer, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Rich. And so as Mr. Shafer was speaking, it occurred to me that maybe I put the slides perhaps not in the best order. The context for what you just heard from Mr. Shafer is, what do we want to put out for consultation? So if you think back to earlier conversations that the ad hoc committee had, what we heard was that there was a general preference for us to have something to put out for consultation on, as opposed to just leaving it as a blank slate, right? So rather than just going out and saying to any particular group or getting feedback on what we would possibly do and what the framework might look like, what we've tried to put together is an idea of what a framework for community benefits at the region of Waterloo would look like, which includes the proposed approach on the couple of Waterloo region housing tenders that are coming up in 2022. And the idea is we would get, input, feedback from the committee today in advance of going out and arranging for a public meeting, which could either be in November and December. So on this slide, we've just shown an excerpt from the terms of reference, which includes that, consultation input with a range of stakeholders. And so we're starting to think about what that would look like, and want to actually have something we can put out as part of that consultation to say, here's what the region is concerned in terms of a community benefits framework, and so that we can get specific input on that framework. We're suggesting the meeting could happen sometime in either November or December. Regardless of when the meeting is held, we'd put an information package together, get invitations out to specific organizations, and obviously promote and advertise a public meeting. But certainly from the committee today, looking for input on what we've suggested with respect to Waterloo region housing projects, the layout, if you will, in general terms of what a framework would look like, and then input around the timing and process for seeking consultation. That might have been more helpful to hear that upfront, so my apologies for that. And then I think
it's okay. It's okay, Craig. That's fine. Sorry, are you finished? Is there something else you'd like to add, Craig, or are you ready to turn over to committee?
I think the final slide was just our timeline, which we've generally covered. So I'm happy to turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, great. Thanks. So I guess maybe there's a lot of information there. I thank staff very much for all the work that you've done. And maybe I would just suggest a way to unpack it a little bit for the discussion. Maybe, Richard, if you could put back up the slide, what I'm going to suggest is, do we have a general kind of buy-in, or at least have a discussion on the overall framework? And then if we agree with the framework, then maybe we can go back and look at the pilot and have a little bit more of a detailed discussion on the pilot, and then that'll help shape our discussion around what public consultation is going to look like. So here's the framework, and I really appreciate the work that staff has done on this. Once Richard gets it back up again, the other one where you had it going horizontally, this here, the proposed approach. All right, is that the same as the framework?
It is, yeah. It just had a different level of detail. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So maybe let's start with the discussion right there. Councillor Kiefer.
Thank you, Chair Strickland. A couple of general questions. It looks good, but I'm going to be geographic here and say, is there an example that could be also brought in from Cambridge perspective? I didn't see anything to that nature. Now, I don't know if there's anything ready in 2022 for Cambridge or not. I was thinking there might be, but that's the first question I have. And the second question is has any of this been or has there been work done at the FCM, Federation of Canadian Municipality level, on any of this work too, where we've gotten information? I was wondering if staff had picked up on that or not. So those are my two questions.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Kiefer. So potential project in Cambridge, and has FCM done any work on community benefits?
So to the first item, we don't have a specific project within the Waterloo Region Master Plan, at least not in 2022. There is a project. There is a housing project. Part of the Waterloo Region Housing Master Plan. There is a project in Cambridge. I think it has a 23 or a 24 start. So we have a couple of different approaches. We can focus on the two projects that are imminent and learn from that, and then apply whatever we've learned to a future project. Alternatively, depending on where we land with the 2022 capital program, we could potentially have a look through and see if there are see if there's another project perhaps in Cambridge that might fit the bill for 2022. So there's a couple of options we could consider. And I'm not sure I know the answer to the FCM question. Perhaps I'll ask Mr. Shafer, or we do have other staff representation on the call. And if anyone has some insight into work that FCM might have done from a community benefits perspective, that would be helpful. And if we don't know the answer, we can certainly do the research.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just a follow up to Craig's reply on the Cambridge location. It would be a good thing, I think, for the region if sometimes in the pilot project or the projects that we're looking at, that Cambridge would be included right from the bat, and not always, phase two, et cetera. I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. I think that you could possibly amend the first section here to include maybe an asterisk that a project in Cambridge, depending on the results of the pilot, would be undertaken in 2023. I don't know the size of that project. Is it going to be of size significant enough, Mr. Dyer?
I think it will be.
Okay, so that's maybe one way we could do that, Carl. That works.
Thanks very much. Yeah.
Okay, let's hang on for a second. Let me just see in the order when we share the screen here. So Councillor Jowett.
Thanks, Chair Strickland. And so the theoretical construct of the equity of this, I like. I mean, where I get a little bit hung up is the supply and demand. So how will we monitor any adverse impacts of it on our sort of local economic development or our local economies for construction? And also post-COVID, taking a look at the labor supply and demand. Like right now, my husband runs a fab shop, and he says like everybody he knows is going out of their mind trying to find skilled labor. And so, you know, like I said, theoretically, I like the idea, but where I get concerned is if the labor pool is already very tight, you know, how do we ensure we're not doing harm to an already existing employment labor economic challenge? Is anybody kind of want to take that on?
Mr. Dyer, do you want to respond to that, or staff? I can I can provide some of my insight if you want.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a compelling response at this point. I think, you know, this is something that we would hopefully get some input on as we go through the public consultation. Certainly, the last thing we want to do is, you know, do anything that's going to have either, you know, a negative impact in terms of bids on our projects. So I think that's something that we can learn through the public input process. I'm not sure I have a better answer at this point. So perhaps back to you, Chair Strickland.
Well, thanks. I think, you know, Councillor Jelen makes a good point, but the point of the tight labor market is precisely why governments are entertaining and putting into place these kinds of initiatives, more entrance into a tight labor market, and have done properly and successfully with the right you know, analysis prior to embarking upon the project and working with stakeholders. It should actually increase labor supply if done correctly. Councillor Jowett.
And so, so some of my concerns are that these kinds of implemented policies might even make it only easier for sort of bigger contract organizations rather than some of our own small. Like I get concerned because I know, you know, Matt Shandy and I have been working really hard with the business community, and they're really crushed right now, and they're feeling the real pinch of the demographic shift of labor. And I'm not trying to be overly challenging here. I'm just very concerned that we get a full labor economic picture, because supply and demand is everything when we insert ourselves in this kind of because legislation can change everything when it comes to something like this. So yeah, so I'd really be interested to hear from the business community specifically. You know, our chambers are hearing it's very difficult, and certainly maybe some of those union halls that can tell us, you know, what it's been like to attract new folks. And, you know, so then, and I get it, Sean, that's probably why we're looking at perhaps a phased approach. But, you know, the other thing about labor economics is the attraction of women to welders was always one of my favorite case studies when I was in school. And the reality is there's not that many women who care for welding, and yet there's not that many males who want to get into human resources. You know what I mean? There are these gender sort of biases and other different biases that perpetuate people going into certain careers. So, you know what, I think it's a complicated issue, and I think if as long as we unpack all of these kinds of pieces that have an impact on it, we might get through it. But again, I think timing, supply are everything, and when we start messing with the demand, you know, by way of organizations fulfilling the responsibility on quotas that we're having a hard time making happen, I guess. Sorry if I've gone about the long way about that, but yeah.
No, that's okay. It's not a straight line, and the only thing I would say is what I said earlier, is that all the problems you identify, like the one about women going into welding, for example, and there's other trades that provide similar examples of, getting hard to get kind of non-traditional demographics into certain trades. Those are precisely the types of issues that community benefits and workforce development agreements try to address, to provide more avenues for more people from different groups to get into the trades. And that's what this is trying to solve. The community benefit agreements are exactly in response to the issues that you're identifying, Councillor Jowett.
And so, Sean, could we even conceivably have a metric or a policy that's targeted at local business as well? I mean, like, do these community benefit agreements, like, I get traditionally that we're looking at marginalized population ratios, but also, is there a way, because I know this has always been a bit of a sticking point, we put so much energy and investment into economic development in the region, and is this another avenue with which we could explore?
Well, in terms, I think the whole initiative is economic development on a micro level, in terms of providing more opportunities for people to gain meaningful employment. And when they do that, they have more money in their pocket. For example, staff's example includes OW recipients.
Yep.
So now they become, active participants in the economy, and that's microeconomic development at its best. Yeah. Okay. I have Mr. Dyer, unless it's burning, because I have Councillor Galloway Harris and Chair Redmond in the queue here.
Just in 10 seconds, I would say, I think we share Councillor Jowett's concern about large versus small firms. And I think the selection of the two Waterloo Region housing projects, larger tenders, $15 to $30 million, we hope would give us some good experience with some of the larger firms.
Right. Okay. Thanks. All right, Councillor Galloway.
Well, thank you, Sean. This may be a continuation of what I was raising. Are we concerned at all in this early phase when our community has not yet turned its mind? When I say this community, I mean the development community, the construction community is not necessarily its mind to community benefits, that we will be scoring, I suppose, tenders more in favor of companies from Toronto or from somewhere else, where they maybe are more sophisticated in terms of the community benefits program, and may in fact have higher concentrations of the marginalized communities that are required to be utilized in a community benefits program. Is there a risk, or are we concerned about that at all? Do I need to be concerned about that? What we wouldn't want to do is have an unintended consequence of out-of-town companies always being the ones that get the tenders, because locals haven't got up to speed yet on community benefits. Or how can we protect against that?
Mr. Dyer?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'll perhaps look to my colleagues to help me out with the answer. I would say that certainly we have restrictions in terms of our ability to be able to award only to local firms. I think this is one of the key areas for us to get some input on through the public consultation process. I think this is what we need to learn and hear from local contractors and their potential response to this kind of program here at the region, so that we don't end up with the unintended consequence that you identified. So again, I think this would be an important part of what we would hope to hear through public consultation. I'm not sure if any of the other staff on the call wanted to expand on that. Mr. Shafer, perhaps.
Thank you. I can just reinforce what you're saying, that this is just our frame of the conversation. We have yet to work through the details, and I know that the GVCA, we've talked with them in the past, and they would give us a lot of input on how to approach that. I think one thing that I just wanted to add here is just connecting the dots in terms of we have different groups, like recruiting of, like giving direction in terms of workforce development to a general contractor would be it would be implied, it would be inherent, not implied, inherent in the design that it's local based. Because the groups could be very well, I mean, we could argue that you don't want that, but we're asking them to perhaps say, work through our Ontario Works group to recruit. We'll provide all these extra services. E&IS have said to me that, they'll provide a lot of support. And then so the general, just basically connecting the dots. General contractor, please talk to so-and-so over here in our Ontario Works group. So that could very much be, as from a pilot perspective, as basic as it could be. It's just make sure that when you're looking for general labor or apprenticing or something like that, check in with our team as well, because we want to provide coaching, mentoring, shadowing opportunities for these people.
Okay. The other question I had was is the reason that the policy wouldn't, we would go through the pilot process and come back to council in late 2023, as the slide suggests. It seems like a protracted period of time for this. Is it because we need to wait for these pilot projects to actually be constructed and commissioned? Is that the reason, the 2023 date?
Yes, if anything, Councillor Galloway, it might even be a year later. But what we're going to learn by the end, certainly within this time period, is what we learn from engaging with the generals, the ones that are bidding on the work, what their feedback is on the program, setting up the program. So I think we'll definitely be in a good shape to comment on the approach that we choose at the time, and any areas that we need to improve. Sorry, go ahead.
So does that mean that we would not do any other community benefits projects until these two pilots were completed? So we would not get into more projects until 2024?
I'm not suggesting that. My role is just working with the two builds. There's 5 in total, but there's 2 that we're looking to include here. This slide is attempting to show that there are many different layers to community benefits, and that there's many different people, many different areas of the organization that could be focusing on service contracts, as an example. Others could be focusing on the living wage. There's lots of different layers to this, and not to suggest that we'd all be waiting for the results of just the 2 housing master plan projects.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
This approach is really leading towards a more broader social procurement kind of initiative, and the community benefits for construction are pretty well in the first the first bullet here, leveraging procurement for capital projects. But to Councillor Galloway's point, there could be other ICI projects other than housing. I mean, King Victoria Transit Hub comes to mind. There might be a couple other ones as well in the capital budget that may be worth another look at as well as we go through the process. Councillor Harris.
Yeah, thanks. I'm wondering if you can just pull up the slide with the, I guess, the motion from council, if you don't mind, whoever's kind of running this. So where's the actual action item? Can you pull
it's the next page, the last bullet, I think. Go to the next slide.
Is that the one?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I guess I just want to hammer the last sentence there. I mean, I do think we're getting the cart a bit before the horse here when we talk about pilot projects. I think council's direction was to establish an ad hoc steering committee you know, to talk about what these community benefit agreement, workforce development agreements look like, you know, the impacts to our region, the pros, the cons. I mean, obviously, Councillor Jallop brought up some, you know, very valid concerns and points. You know, I often ask what actual problem that we are trying to fix here in this regard. What are the unintended consequences? And I think these are the type of questions that this committee should into to be able to report back to council before we move in, you know, adopting a pilot project. I think that they want to know more about community benefits, how they've worked in other jurisdictions, if at all, in fact. And I know that is, you know, they haven't really worked, you know, in other jurisdictions, or don't have a lot of concrete examples of it to the size and scope that I think we would be able to offer. So, you know, before I would be able to support, you know, any sort of pilot project, I think we need to consult with the community, especially after we received letters from the OGCA, the GVCA, advising us of some concerns that they would have. I mean, we all probably watched last night Doug Ford on TV stumbling over his own words on how to explain the fact that we have a skilled labor shortage. So, you know, I think that consultation piece is by far more important for me and this committee to go back to council to give them the confidence that we've fleshed out, you know, what are community benefits agreements, how, what are the positives, what are the cons, what in this environment should we be taking special focus of before we start piloting a project without any information. So, I mean, I think people probably have a pretty good idea where I stand on these things, but I think that we owe it to council, as per this directive, to come back with some more robust information on educating our colleagues on what these are, how they can benefit, what are the drawbacks, consult properly with our local community, especially the employers who, for the most part, have a direct relationship with their employees before we remotely start piloting any type of construction project. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. We agreed at last meeting that we would bring something forward, something tangible that we would bring forward for community consultation. And in terms of the pilot projects proceeding, that would be part, obviously, of a report to council, which would include an overview of the pros and cons, probably a, you know, an abridged version of the information that we received from the various groups throughout this process. And then council will ultimately determine if they want to proceed with the pilot or not. This can make that recommendation or not, but ultimately council will make the final determination to proceed. Chair Redmond.
Thanks, Chair Strickland. And I back to the horizontal one that we were looking at. I share a lot of the concerns that people have already expressed, but I think the pilot project, what it does for me is it road tests what might be in theory. And I don't know that we're going to know how this shakes out in Waterloo region until we try it. I'm very interested in the community consultation. I know we have a major construction site in our next door neighbor, and a young woman went through Conestoga College, and she was hired immediately as a framer. And I know that there's, I have a relative that's going through Conestoga College to be a carpenter, and I would see this as an opportunity for those people to get employment. And again, I realize that there's a skilled worker shortage, so they probably would get a job anyway. I really like the consultation. I'm assuming that as part of the working group, staff are tapping our equity, diversity, and inclusion staff that is here at the Waterloo region. I think it's really important that if we think we're benefiting some of the groups that we've talked about, they need to be included as we go forward. It isn't just about developers and construction companies. It's also about the underrepresented groups and what would make a difference to them. So I'm really keen to know that that kind of consultation would go forward. I would also think that it's really important to talk to Conestoga College about what they see as shortages and what they see as opportunities, because it seems to me when you have that kind of resource within your community, that needs to be part of your due diligence too. So the threshold of just under $100,000 per service contract, I also think is really interesting. And I would like to hear from the community. And maybe it is those contractors and construction companies, as well as other service providers, how realistic that threshold is, given that we're complicating the whole proposition by asking them. I see also that there's a draft set of KPIs. I don't see targets on this. So I guess as we go forward, I think that the pilots are a great idea, coupled with the consultation to find out exactly how complicated and how workable this well-intentioned approach is. So I think, again, we'll go back to council. It will be council's decision whether or not we go forward with this. I think, generally speaking, people love the spirit of what this is trying to accomplish, but we're not there yet. And if we go there, I think it has to be consulting with the people for whom we think this will be a benefit.
Okay, thanks, Chair Redmond. So I'm just wondering, in terms of steps forward, would it make sense, Chair Redmond, maybe that if you would move that this committee supports the proposed approach in principle, subject to additional input from council and the general public? Does that make sense?
Yep, I'd be happy to move that.
Okay, can we get a seconder for that? Councillor Nowak. Okay, great. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor? Just raise your hand. All right. All right. Opposed, if any? Okay, Councillor Harris opposed. Thanks. All right. Okay, great. Thanks. Good discussion. So now maybe if we could go back and look at the pilot project, the tendering stuff specifically. We can maybe put that slide up there about the proposed language. And I see Richard's on the call as well. So I think Richard had a hand in drafting this. And I just like to raise a couple of concerns once we get it up there. Okay, just one, the last bullet there. I'd also like to include veterans in that group in terms of designated persons, if the committees are amenable to that. You know, there's a well-established program called Helmets to Hard Hats. There's other workforce development programs where veterans are introduced into the construction industry and provided opportunity, but they still need more avenues to get in. And there are a lot of training occurs in the military and our armed forces that has certainly developed skills that are transferable to construction. So I'd like to see that included in there as well. Councillor Nowak?
Yeah, and I agree with that, Sean. I'm just wondering whether it would be wise to also include immigration partnership in some of the discussions as well. Is it possible for us to search out some of the skills that we need through that partnership? Can we designate to certain what skills we're looking for when people come into the country? Could we just include immigrants in this scenario as well, or are they not considered marginalized? I'm throwing that out.
Joe, if I may, I would suggest that we include that group as part of the stakeholder consultation for sure. But part of the problem for construction in general is that if you're a construction worker and try to immigrate to Canada, you don't qualify. It's not deemed as a necessary group. And so that's something that many stakeholders are working on to change. But certainly in terms of a partnership and consultation with stakeholders, the immigration partnership and the settlement and immigration communities, I think would be very worthwhile to have conversations with. Good suggestion.
I also just wanted to point out, I like Chair Redmond's thought to consult with Conestoga College. And I'm just wondering if they would have, or whether we would be able to get some sort of metrics that would identify exactly, how many welders are out there, how many, whatever the, the specialty is. Because I agree with Councillor Jowett. It's if the skills aren't there, this is going to be a very difficult process to go through. Just my thoughts.
Sure. Thanks, Joe. I'm sure staff is going to look at all those groups as well. Councillor Jowett.
Thanks, Chair Strickland. The organization that I think, I don't know if it's been on here, I did look, is Waterloo Wellington Training and Adjustment Board. Our own Valerie, who just got elected, was chair of that. And it's an organization that's been around for as long as I can remember. And they are continually keeping the labor stats on our region as well as Dufferin and Guelph. And so they talk to businesses, and businesses try to give them a realistic target for hiring. And then of course, so they go and pool all these pieces of information that we're looking for. It's probably one of the best sources. They're reactive though when the reports come out. So I think that would probably be a good source, but should be probably most coupled with anecdotal reporting from the chambers, because like I said, I'm hearing from everybody. Like, people are asking me to go back in and start finding labor for them and stuff, and it's like and so I'm getting these stories. Everybody's very frustrated. It's not just the skilled trades that are depleting before our eyes. It's the labor pool mass exodus that we've all, I used to talk about this in my 20s when I was in school. So this is the big clear out of the retiring boomers. It's coming, it's here, you know? And so that's, I think if we can really understand, you know, what that's starting to look like, it might help us. Like, cause I get it. Like, I love the idea of engaging our OW recipients and our ODSP recipients, because I think that's the way it was when I was a lot younger. That was one of the first labor pools that, you know, our government ran recruitment agencies, they would go to, you know, it was pretty well done. So yeah, so Sean, that's a good one, WW tab. And then of course, I think your chambers, but like in a post-COVID world, we really need to recognize the shift that's happened here. Like, it kind of, I think it was like a psychological impact of a lot of people saying, I may as well retire, I'm done. Like, we saw a lot of that in businesses, right? So I think if we can get our head around what's actually happening out there, we might feel better about it.
Well, yeah, and to your point, Helen, about labor shortages and immigration, we need more immigration, period, to help fulfill labor demand in all sectors in Canada. So it's a big issue for sure.
And we went away from there. Like, when I was on the board of employment and immigration, we literally made an acute decision to stop saying skilled labor when we were using collateral that discussed regularly attracting labor through immigration to our country, because they felt it was holding people back from coming to our country, and that this opened, like, it's all about casting a net. And your messaging casts the net, right? And then of course, you know, the supply has to be there in the first place. So there are people that are immigrating, but our immigration catapulted into a much larger supply once we had taken off the parameters of skilled labor only. So, you know, messaging matters, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Great. Thanks, Helen. So the other point I had on here is, and I'm really concerned about the second bullet. The least thing we want to do is make work projects. And successful community benefit programs have meaningful jobs, i.e. apprenticeship. Opportunities for young people, you know, Indigenous, female, everything that we list at the bottom there, BIPOC groups, veterans. But if we're only requiring them, you know, for 6 weeks full time, that's not a meaningful job. That's not a career. That's a make work project. You know, so we really need to, in my view, strengthen this component up. And you know, there's all kinds of examples of, you know, minimum requirements for apprenticeship. And I know this is kind of getting inside baseball a little bit. Councillor Harris is aware of this. There's requirement for apprenticeship ratios on jobs in the province of Ontario, and maybe it's as simple as that you know, contractors must fulfill the apprenticeship requirements as required by the Ontario Ministry of Labour. we want to make sure that we're creating opportunities that last longer than 6 weeks. If we're going to leverage capital projects, it's got to be meaningful work. It's got to be apprenticeship and journey persons opportunities. So I'm not sure if Richard, if your group had a look at that, or you know, how did you land on the 6 weeks full time, combinations of part time? You know, I understand where you're coming from on there, but that's not real meaningful work. That is, you know, itinerant work.
Thank you for the comment. I can give a little background on it. The thinking here, and certainly I'm on a journey of learning with you on this, is that there's some people that just getting, as it was explained to me, just getting them out to a job site for a short time would be a win. Getting their boots on, figuring out WSIB stuff, you know, health and safety things, and it was proposed that something along the lines of 6 weeks would be appropriate for that group. And I think what I'm hearing from you is certainly per bigger picture, the apprenticeship piece is something we would want to look at including and making that more of the requirement than it is for this. But I would appreciate an opportunity to go to my colleagues in ENIS and float this conversation again, because I'm taking this back a couple of years.
Yeah, that would be good. And I've had previous conversations with Douglas and a couple other folks from you know, employment services, and you know, if it's set up this way, then we're using our construction projects as an introduction to construction, and that's not really what we want. We really want to have that work take place before the contractor is able to access them to get onto the job site. Like, it's got to be meaningful employment. This can't be a, you know, sticking your toes in to see if it makes sense for you to go into construction. I mean, that's got to happen, you know, elsewhere. Sure, there's a component of this here, but it's got to be meaningful work. And if you require the contractor to hire apprentices in the contract, they're going to do it. Okay, so I don't know. I see someone else's hand up, but I'm sorry, I don't know who that is. M.A. Wolf?
That's me. It's got a Conestoga. It still logged me in from last night, but I'm actually a manager with employment and income support here on behalf of Carolyn today, and just going to weigh in a little bit on the 6 weeks. Wasn't here for the history of it, but what I think we may be getting to, and I'm not sure, again, my first time here, is just in speaking to what Chair Redmond has mentioned about linking with Conestoga. 6 weeks, I can imagine, was a way of probably tempting an employer to take on someone that maybe they weren't 1,000% sure of. We want to really strengthen the program and look at how to improve the success rate of individuals who take on these positions. Then that's where we'd want to look to partner with a training provider to see that we created a pool, like potentially a programming that people went through that they could be scooped from, so that we could have some greater confidence in their skills. And there are programs that exist like this out there, and there are some things underway currently within the region that we're looking at that would try to address that need. So a little bit more of building a bridge between just a job seeker and an industry, where there's some more understanding of what the industry is and a greater potential that those people will be successful, because they do understand a little bit what they're getting into. They have had some orientation to what work would be like. And in that way, maybe we could have the folks who are participating in this have greater confidence in the folks that they're bringing out, extend that time period. So just 2 cents I wanted to add there.
Well, I appreciate that. I see others want to get in, and I could see that as, you know, a component potentially of the procurement requirement, but we need to have apprenticeship commitments written into this. It's a must. And, you know, if the thinking is that we're going to take, you know, God bless them, the folks off Ontario Works, and put them on a construction site for 6 weeks and see if they get into an apprenticeship trade, it ain't going to work. the skill requirements for construction trades, the math, the there's a lot of academic requirements for skilled construction trades today. This can't be like an Ontario Works kind of project, and that's what I'm concerned with when I see here. I think that could be a component of it, and they could provide great opportunity for people on Ontario Works. But we want to create meaningful employment. There's got to be apprenticeship requirements built into this procurement document as well. Councillor Nowak.
Sean, I think you just answered my question, but I just wanted to, I'm just wondering where the greatest shortage right now is. Is it in the skilled or is it in the general labor? Is there a huge shortage in general labor out there? And is there a way that they could, if they were hired as part of the community benefits, that they could conduit sort of into a skilled trade?
Joe, I would say both. I would say both. There's a huge demand for unskilled labor in construction as there is for skilled labor in construction. So that's why I think, a component of this, the 6 weeks full time, would make sense for the more unskilled portions of the construction industry. But you need to have apprenticeships for some of the red seal trades as well. Like, we want to create meaningful opportunities for people. But you make a good point. Like, there's room for both, and I agree with you.
Thanks, Sean.
Yeah, absolutely. Councillor Jowett?
Thanks, Chair Strickland. And so I get this 6 week meaningful, and I'm really glad the person from Conestoga spoke up. I'm sorry I missed her name, but the meaningful work is important. I get what you're saying here too, Sean. It is a dual reciprocal challenge, though. I mean, to saddle somebody with a obligation to an employee in this way, and what if they are a poor performer and they cause undue hardship on the business? Or, I mean, somebody who's a general laborer who's doing some pipe fitting, is unable to pick up the mid-skill level, and millions of dollars of hardship happens because they can't, I don't know. Like, I'm just throwing some of those ideas out there because we are saddling with employers, employees that are not based specifically and first on their ability to be productive in the environment, like as the first objective, I guess. So when I look at that tenure, I go, so you think the 6 weeks is too short, and what if we could find a way to kind of look at it within the realm of the 3 month waiting period? I wouldn't want it to go beyond that, though, Sean, because I think that you're entering into the danger territory of employment standards, which make it more adverse rather than positive. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know what you're saying, Helen. But 6 weeks, you say it might be too short. I would suggest for many that'd be too long. Like Councillor Harris knows, lots of folks have an impression of what it's like to work on a construction site, and they don't last a day once they get there and find out what the reality is. And then you got a contractor in this situation who's got to manage that. So, this is where this kind of pre-planning and workforce analysis needs to happen in order for this to be successful. You got to match the person with the skills and the jobs that are required at that certain stage of that construction project. So, I know we're kind of getting into baseball here, but inside baseball, but, earlier on in a project, you could use more or less skilled labor to move dirt and do some of the site servicing and a lot of the heavy lifting. And then, as the foundation gets going and the project comes out of the ground, then you can use some more apprenticeshable trades like mechanical, electrical. And so that's why you kind of need to plan it out. What are the requirements and what are the contractors you're going to work with? We're not even talking about how you're going to the job. I don't know if it's going to be lump sum or if it's going to be a CCDC 5A or 5B. That all has impact on it as well. But the point here, without getting too much into the weeds, is that I think there needs to be a combination of this 6 weeks kind of exposure for the more manual type labor components with meaningful apprenticeship for more of the red seal trades. There's got to be a combination of both.
I see. So you're looking at them from two different perspectives. I actually thought that you thought the 6 weeks wasn't long enough, Sean, and I was thinking the same thing. Like, you know, it happens all the time in fab shops and other construction sites. Right, someone doesn't last past a day, especially if we're, you know, adding the non-usual suspects that go into the field, right? So, you know, so I'm glad we've clarified that, but I would caution us from entering into the realm of taking away the undue hardship of business, you know, by being too dictatorial about what performance standards are acceptable and unacceptable, I guess.
Yeah, you're right. And that's why many community benefit agreements, so for example, say, you know, 10% of all workers need to be from an apprenticeable trade, where they're, you know, from a red seal trade, and then the contractor's just got to comply with that. Or you could say, you know, 20% apprentices, and of those 20%, 10% are from an Indigenous female BIPOC group, as per the bottom bullet here. So what I would suggest to staff is maybe, you know, you take some of this feedback. I know Councillor Harris or Chair Redmond want to get in, and because we're not going to solve this today, but take some of this feedback and maybe have another look at this, like Richard has suggested. Councillor Harris?
Yeah, I think that the discussion on the second point here with the hours, I mean, Councillor Strickland, obviously you make some good points from a practical perspective as to the reality of a site and an individual coming to site and how that all works. But I think that reinforces the fact that we really need to go out and consult properly. We're using, you know, perhaps information from a couple of years ago to guide the committee, where we need to get relevant, practical, on the ground, realistic time frame type consultation with those experts to guide us. Because I don't think this committee is able to comment, frankly, on the details and the prescriptiveness of the actual community benefit policies that we're going to ask contractors to adhere to without actually hearing from those people that have to employ those folks. When it comes to, you know, I know we're talking about IC&I buildings right now, potentially as a pilot, but as you know, or as many of you may not know, when you get into the civil construction, there are actually no apprenticeships available on the civil side. So, you know, if you start requiring, you know, apprenticeships to be a mandate, you know, you're going to get into an issue where if we're actually including civil projects, that actually is not going to happen, or even voluntary trades for that matter. So, you know, again, I really encourage staff and the committee to task the staff with proper consultation so that we can be guided based on people's input who live this every day as we move forward with what this might look like, because we're just going to spin our wheels on trying to debate something that, frankly, this committee doesn't have the expertise to do so.
All right, thanks, Councillor Harris. Chair Redmond?
Thank you, Chair Strickland. I totally concur with Councillor Harris. I do think that this needs to be part of a consultation process about people that know this whole issue. We're not reinventing the wheel here. We know that there are examples of other community benefits programs in other municipalities. I really do like the pilot projects because we may put something out to tender and find out there's no uptake. And that will be part of the information as we go forward as well. So I think this is a solid plan. I would also agree that this should go back to staff. They've done a lot of hard work. And I think some of these questions really do need to be answered by the community. And this should be about outcomes and people, because that's really what this is aimed at. And that kind of input also needs to be part of our path forward. So I think it's a great start, but I think we could talk in circles for a really long time and never resolve some of these questions. All good points, but we need other people to weigh in on what the right answers are.
Okay, so I'm just wondering that, so we have an agreement in principle to we support in principle the planned approach. There's still some questions about this that I think could be the staff. I would suggest staff take another look at this and take another crack at this based on some of the feedback today, and then share it with the committee. I don't think we need to maybe have another meeting. I'll leave it to Craig on the timing, because we did say that we wanted to get something back in November. But before we take it out for consultation, which I think we need to have happen with industry, I think it needs to have a little bit more thought put into it. One more iteration from staff before we take it out to industry. And so, how would that all work? Maybe we have a quick meeting in a couple more weeks just to look at this slide. And then from there, if we're in agreement, then we'd have a full package that we could take forward to the community and to council. Does that make sense? Mr. Dyer?
If I may, Mr. Chair, yes, I think that does make sense. And I would just say that the feedback and conversation we've had today, I think, is exactly what we were hoping for today. So thanks to you and the committee members for your direct feedback. It's been very helpful for us. And what I'm taking from the conversation is we can do some make a few updates, propose changes to some of the conditions, bring that back to this group for kind of a final okay, for lack of a better term, before we go out for consultation. And if that's the committee, then we'll absolutely make that happen.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Looks like we're all in agreement with that. Because, if we just take it out the way it is, then you'll have the discussion that we just had, like, amplified by 10, right? And you're going to come back. And so if we just fine tune it a little bit more, I think that'll make for a more beneficial discussion with industry and the community. Okay, so we're all good. That's great. Good discussion. Thanks, everyone. Next meeting, TBA, we talked about that. Is there any other business to come before the Ad Hoc Community Benefits Committee? We're all good. So, well, thanks again, everyone. That was a great discussion. Really appreciate it. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Galloway, Councillor Nowak, all those in favor, that's carried. Thanks very much, everyone. Take care.